Welcome everybody to the final talk in our 175 series, and I hope I'm not doing too much of a disrespect to the other speakers if I say that we've kept the best for last. I'm delighted to welcome Sir Robert Burgess, Sir Bob, who is a Bede man, graduating from Durham University in 1971. He then went on to take a PhD at my own alma mater of Warwick and remained there as a lecturer and eventually became Professor of Sociology in 1981. He was Senior Pro-Vice Chancellor at Warwick from 1995 to 1999 before moving on to the University of Leicester as Vice Chancellor. Sir Bob has served on numerous committees and governing bodies, and in 2007 chaired the steering group that produced the Burgess report calling for changes in university degree classifications. I so wish that had been implemented properly. He was knighted in the 2010 New Year's Honours List and has received honorary degrees from a number of institutions, including our own, just last summer. After such a distinguished career in education, I hope you'll agree that there could be no better person to conclude our 175 series. So over to you, Sir Bob.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for people coming along this evening. What I want to do is to take up the issues that appeared in the invitation that Jan sent to me, and it was over a year ago now, but I thought it was worth remembering. My initial thought was that these talks might be given something of a career slant, how I got to where I am from where you are now. I have to say, I've played around with these sentences for some time to try and distill what it was that was being expected. And then I came up with the idea of the title, When I Grow Up I Want to Be. And the first thing to say to you is I wouldn't have slotted the words Vice Chancellor in there. But I'll go on and explore that, and then I want to come on and talk about student careers, and that will allow me to talk about the Higher Education Achievement Report, which Durham has issued since June 2015. So very good indeed. So let's, if I wouldn't have filled in the words Vice Chancellor, why would that be? Well, firstly, I doubt, given the kind of schools that I went to, I doubt if we would have known what a Vice Chancellor was, and even if we knew what a Vice Chancellor was, we certainly would not know what he or she, and I say he or she, but at the time it would have been pretty much exclusively he, I regret to say, did during the course of their day-to-day job. So I start from Bede and Durham, and I apologise, but I can't get into my head Hild Bede, and I can get half of it in, so I'm going to talk about coming to Bede. And coming to Bede meant training for a vocation, because I had always decided that I wanted to be a teacher. And it seemed to me that was an appropriate thing to do. It seemed to me that going to an area which I'd never been in before, and an area which contrasted with where I grew up, namely I grew up in South Somerset, so coming to the northeast was really an exciting prospect. And coming to Bede and Durham was to train for a vocation as far as I was concerned, because Bede at the time had 700 trainee teachers, and my guess is that St Hild's also had about the same number. And one of the things that I did was to register to be a junior secondary school teacher. And I'm telling you all this because I think, although people say you came to train as a teacher but you gave up, and I say, oh no, I didn't, because you can see traces of this in the various things I've done in education and higher education over the years. But I just want to raise a question with you here, those of you either from the college or from the university. And that is that back in the 1960s, there were 700 trainee teachers next door, or sorry, on the other, your neighbouring site, and probably about the same number here. And I think they were linked in all sorts of ways. First of all, people who had less good A levels than people who held positions in the university. Secondly, people who were the first in their family to go into higher education. Thirdly, people who had decided that teaching was a career for them. It was an early career choice. But what all this amounts to, in my view, was that Hild Bede were in the game of widening participation long before it was coined as a common term in the higher education sector. And I just would want the college to think about that in relation to what it is that you do now. Is it that someone with less good A levels and whose family had no links with university would stand as good a chance? And I happen to be talking in Durham. If I were talking in Leicester, I would say the same. If I were talking in any other UK university, I would say the same. Because we have taken the rhetoric of widening participation, but nevertheless, as various reports have indicated, there is a narrowness of vision in terms of who gets to university and the opportunities that they have. And I think that what Bede and Durham gave me was the opportunity to participate in the higher education sector. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, was whereas now we talk about 50% of the 18-year-old population coming into higher education, although I never realised it because all my friends seemed to go into higher education at the time, actually only 5% of 18-year-olds were going to university or into higher education of some kind, and at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, which is my vintage. So from my point of view, teaching was a career because it offered employability and there was high employment rates among school teachers. And I got the opportunity, first of all, in terms of graduating from teacher training, I got the opportunity to stay in Durham in order to read for a degree in sociology. And what I discovered on leaving was that both teaching and sociology led to employability, just as they do now, in the sense that whilst reading for the undergraduate degree, the first degree, I was doing it at a time when, of course, I qualified as a teacher. And this meant that I could work vacations as a teacher. And actually, not so long ago, I discovered it also has an impact on pension, because I obviously signed up to the pension scheme at the time that occurred. The other thing I should say is that I didn't cop out of teaching completely, school teaching, because I engaged in teaching social studies in a secondary school in Kent. And from that point of view, I remember standing in the school staff room in Kent saying, "This is not leaving, I will be back." And I'm afraid the moment is not repeated in terms of me actually going back. But one of the things that I would say is that there are various threads that reappear in my career later. And to coin a phrase that is used in your wonderful book on Durham, the Durham Difference, and I think the difference that you get from Durham is that, first of all, the collegiate system is very different from running a group of halls of residence. And for those of us who've been in universities or worked for universities where there are halls of residence, you can have great life for students in halls. And I wouldn't want to say anything other than that to my former colleagues who've who've run halls, but they're not colleges, and colleges bring with them a whole range of activity and also an identity. Put two Durham graduates together, and what is the first question they ask? They ask, which college did you go to? They don't ask, what did you read at university? And I think that's very telling, because I certainly think in terms of Warwick and Leicester, the first question that they would ask is, what did you read in Warwick or Leicester? And from that point of view, the university becomes important in context, but is, it seems to me, a backdrop to the college system. So the college system is very important, and very important in terms of what it has to offer. But there's also the university department, and I sometimes think, and I've often reflected on this, in terms of, especially given my experience of teaching sociology in Warwick for a long number of years, I always felt that the students identified with the department, and that made a big difference. Whereas I think those of us who were here in the 60s and 70s, 44 Old Albert, I can't walk up Old Albert without looking at 44 and 45 and thinking what happened beyond the front door in 44 and 45. But actually, I would have to say the department was not as significant as the college, and I think that would be replicated across Durham in respect of how people operate. How it operates today, I don't know. Maybe people would like to talk about that. Now, I think it's ever so easy to talk about universities in terms of coming here for the formal curriculum, for pedagogy, and for a whole host of other extramural activities, some of which they would want to talk about and others that they would want shielded from view. And I want to tap into something what I call developing networks, because when I look back, sociology in Durham was very important to me in making the transition from teaching into taking a degree course, but also the person who admitted me to the university was someone who sociologists in the audience will know, Professor John Rex. And John Rex set up the Durham department when he was only allowed to call it social theory and institutions. This awful word sociology was not to be used. And then in 1970 the world changed and he could call it sociology, but he decided the bright lights of the University of Warwick, with all its opportunities to set up a new sociology department, whereby Durham had 6 staff, Warwick had 20 staff, 20 young staff I should hasten to add, at least that's what we all thought we were at the time, and it became a very significant department in the university. But for me, John Rex encountered me on the Warwick campus visiting a friend in the January I graduated, and he said, why don't you come to Warwick and have an SSRC award? So the SSRC for the Social Science Research Council, as it's then called. I have to say what he was doing was unthinkable in terms of the days when I subsequently chaired the SRC training board, and I would have been somewhat horrified to know that professors of sociology or professors of anything were going around doling out studentships without interviews and without all that kind of thing. And what I would say about this is it's part of a network, and it got me into a network which linked me up with the professional association, because alongside John Rex there was also another very distinguished academic called Richard Brown, who he and I worked together in the British Sociological Association. And so Durham had an impact upon the kinds of things that I do and did. And I would also then turn to Bede at the time and say that Gerald Collier I came back for a 50th reunion last year, and I heard someone sitting in this room actually, and someone said Gerald Collier was not very distinguished, and I said I'd like to differ, because Gerald did research on higher education and higher education teaching methods, and he never taught any of that in the college. It was only when I graduated that he started sending me copies of papers that he'd written and papers that he'd delivered. And they used to come and stay with us, and he was fascinating to talk to. And the other thing I owe to him is he introduced me to somebody called Bill Taylor, who had been head of the education department in Bede, and who went on subsequently to be director of the London Institute of Education and subsequently Vice Chancellor of the University of Hull. And so what I would say is Durham was very important in terms of networks. And it's not just the higher education is very much into networking, at least in my view it is. And one of the things that if you look at the collections of people who appear in various books that academics edit, myself included, I think you can trace out the networks that are there in terms of, at one level we would say the intellectual influences, at another level I think we would be talking about friendships, and friendships that were based upon intellectual activity. And so those are two of the people that I would pull out of the examples that I have given. But I'd also say you've got to think about the students that you were with in any university environment, because they are what makes the university experience. And you'll see I go on to argue that many years later, when we start to devise the Higher Education Achievement Report. And I think that's very important in terms of people developing their careers. But meanwhile, back at me and Warwick, I owe very much the John Rex for giving me a place in Warwick. And that enabled me to move from being a doctoral student to the senior Pro-Vice Chancellor over a period of 25 years. And the first time Hilary and I drove down the lane at Warwick, we didn't believe what awaited us down the hill, because we were very accustomed to Durham with all its wonders. And I remember saying, I think this is a 3-year stop, and we'll move off somewhere else. And the day I left Warwick, I drove around the ring road, and I thought, I'm really proud of being part of this, because I think it was a very exciting place to work, very exciting place to be, and with lots of innovation. And when I went to Leicester, I used to say to them, I bet you used to say that upstart up the road shouldn't be called a university. Look at it now, and I think that's very important. And in terms of careers, I don't think students or staff should think about a career, but I think one needs to break it down into a number of different careers. So if I look at the time I was at Warwick, I would say over 25 years I had 5 different jobs. As lecturer, as departmental chair, as we called them in Warwick, which was head of department, chair of faculty, which other universities called deans, and I became the first graduate dean in Warwick, and then went on to become senior PDC. And all this got me from the sociology department into aspects of university government and university governance. So I began to view higher education from a much broader perspective, and from that point of view that served as a preparation to become a Vice Chancellor and for the move to Leicester, where in Leicester we were needing to look at how you develop the whole of a university, how you change the position, the branding and the positioning of the university, and how you also set up a series of relationships internally and externally. Because a Vice Chancellor, if you ever say in whatever university you work in, I've not seen the Vice Chancellor, he must not be working anywhere here. And bear in mind that the job of Vice Chancellor, and should a search consultant ring you up to say, would you like to be a Vice Chancellor, say yes, because it's a fantastic job, but you get to choose what you want to do. And from that point of view, my choice in Leicester was to focus on internal things within the university, getting the academic structure to be reorganised in a different way, and also looking at the curriculum and the way in which that was organised, and also creating opportunities for certain things to occur. And I know that people very often associate me with the development of an annual sculpture show, which took place over 13 years in Leicester. And those would be some of the things that I think a Vice Chancellor can make a difference, or try to make a difference, over a particular period of time. But there's also the way in which Vice Chancellors contribute externally. And I was saying to Jan earlier that until her lecture series list came round, I didn't realise that Nick Gibb, the Minister for Education, was in fact a former Bede student. I used to go and negotiate with him on behalf of Universities UK over teacher training. And I think it would be reasonable to say that his views and mine are somewhat divergent. Must be the training that doesn't, and shows what a broad church it is in terms of what it does. But working externally becomes very important in terms of how it reflects back on your institution and how you can make a difference to the higher education sector. So, what are the external activities that I've been involved in? I think that when I look through it, I see a number of threads which focus on things that occurred in terms of teacher training here in Durham. First of all, I've focused on teaching to be as important as research, so that Leicester was one of the first institutions that gave people professorial titles if they reach sufficient standing in the field of teaching and education. And I think that's very important. Now it's very common across the country for academics to either be offered a chair or to bid for a chair and to be offered a professorial appointment either based on research or teaching, or in some cases a combination of teaching and research. And that is very much a thread that runs through what I've been doing. Secondly, assessment has been something that has been with me now for nearly 10 years, having been approached to chair national committees looking at degree classification. And one of the things that has resulted in is me then thinking about how you can help develop student careers. One of the things we now talk about is the student experience, and how the student experience is very important. So one of the things that my guess would be is Durham must make quite a feature of the colleges in order to talk about what is a very distinctive, outside Oxbridge, very distinctive approach to higher education. And one of the things that I've been interested in is to say, well, how, in terms of the contribution that the university, or in Durham's case, the college, makes to the development of student careers, how do you begin to record that for students and how do you begin to make it a portfolio of work that can be looked at by employers and by others? Well, in 2003, the government produced a white paper, as always, on the future of higher education, and paragraph 4.7 did not leap out at me when I read through it, when it said, we must ensure that we have robust ways of describing, measuring and recording student achievement, which are helpful to the student, to institutions, to employers and other stakeholders. Well, I didn't notice that paragraph, but that paragraph has influenced and occupied considerable amounts of my time over the best part of just over a decade now. And it takes the form of looking at how you measure and record student achievement and how you make available details of the student record, both in terms of different grading systems, and we're still looking at how to implement a common grade point average system in the UK, but we've also looked at other ways to measure achievement. So what's the context for this occurring? Well, earlier I mentioned that when I came into higher education, 5% of the 18-year-old population came to university. 50% now come to higher education. And is it that the whole of the 50% get the same experience that me and my contemporaries got in Durham in the 60s? And indeed, I don't think you can say, well, it's all in one direction or another, because actually teaching is given greater scrutiny now than it ever was in the 60s. I could describe some tutorials which I don't think not only Durham but any higher education institution would not be terribly proud of. And I think we've actually cleaned up our act. And we all know that because I can see various people smiling as I say it, and you reflect back on your university career. And I don't think it's because I've been in a position where I wouldn't see these things anymore, because I think some of the things that happened with regard to teaching you would get to hear about. And there have been changes in the sector in terms of the kinds of students that we take. Taking 50% as opposed to 5%, it's a different experience. And one of the things, I remember at Warwick in the early 1970s, we were admitting students who had very poor A-level results. And I suspect these days that some of the people who got in on grades D and E now would have to get 3 A's in order to get into Warwick. And that's how it's changed. And I think, but also you've got a much broader sector. So is it that you still have to judge potential, and judging potential for students to come to university, if we're going to breach the 50% level and go on to recruit even more students? But do you teach the same curriculum as you taught in the 70s or 80s or 90s? Or do you change the curriculum? I mean, my colleagues tell me that whereas someone like me used to ask people to read books, these days you can be asked, can you tell me which pages of the book that I'm meant to read? And I think that produces new challenges in terms of how you teach, what you teach, and how you assess. And I think those are questions that, thankfully, the system has been challenged to think about those issues. And from that point of view, I think that that's important to our context. The other thing I think to bear in mind is that The UK is one of the few countries that offers a classified honours degree, so that whilst we may say we find it puzzling how grade point averages are used in other institutions in other countries, for many people worldwide the puzzle is, what does a 2-1 actually mean? And what does it equate to? And how does one evaluate it? And from that point of view, the UK honours degree is seen as a very high quality qualification. But the problem is how we go about classifying students and how we do this. Heads of institutions are very much in favour of changing the honours degree classification system. It's when you talk to people who are teaching, particularly at the time of year when we've been consulting people in the summer term, they all tell us in the summer term that they know how to distinguish between a 2-1 and a 2-2, and there's no problem associated with it at all. I beg to differ, and I think that one of the things we need to do is to build upon the international reputation of the honours degree, but to think about how we go about grading students. So one of the things I've been associated with is developing a higher education achievement report, which we've developed over the last 10 years. We must have now somewhere in excess of 90 institutions that are issuing here to their students. Various universities report that those students who leave with a higher education achievement report stand a better chance of employment than others. And one of the things that we're doing is to meet the requirements of the Bologna Treaty back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. It talked about providing transcripts to all students who've been through higher education. So that's one reason in order to meet the Bologna Treaty requirement. But in turn, students now invest much more, and parents as well, into the higher education experience. And from that point of view, one of the things that we need to do is to give students more detail about their success and about the record that they have. And from that point of view, we've argued in the committee that I chaired that we need to give students greater detail of the degree result. It is not sufficient to say you got a 2-1 on 6 modules out of however many, and you got first class marks on these other modules. You need to be able to calibrate much more carefully than that, and you also need to give students much more detail on their degree result. Employers and other senior managers like the higher education achievement report because it assists the employability of students. It tackles an issue of the fees agenda. If you're charging over £9,000 per year, do you require something more than just you got a 2-1? And have we got close to a position where we almost say to our students, do you want a 2-1 or will you take the exam? And I think we're pretty close to the latter in terms of the problems associated with grading students. I also think that we need to give students a record of their experience, or those parts of their experience that they would wish to make public. And I think that's very important because we used to trial the higher education achievement report saying, what if you were the social secretary of the local Marxist group in your university, or the Society for the Overthrow of Capitalism? Would you want that on your CV when you were going to be interviewed by some Swiss accountancy firm in London, or by some top group of lawyers, and I think that's a real, that was the example we always gave. We then discovered that the lesbian, gay, bisexual student societies around the UK universities were very concerned that they could not stop or indeed offer what should go into the higher education achievement report with regard to their sexuality. And that resulted in a debate about what it is you make public about a student's life at university. And also there's the question of, are you changing the nature of the student experience in higher education if you're going to record some of these things? And I think that's one of the things that we need to think about. The other aspect, of course, is widening participation means that there are groups of people who come into the higher education sector now who have not been best pupil all the way through their schooling, and from that point of view need some assistance in order to demonstrate what it is they are very good at and what it is that they have developed and enhanced during their university career. So one of the things we have done, and it is we, it's not me, I chaired the group, but a group of us have developed a higher education achievement report with a simple and clear template with a common core, so that no matter what university you will receive your higher education achievement report from, it is the same framework. And of course the PwCs of this world like that because it means they can select students on that basis and they can sort students in terms of the performance. We think it gives a wider record of performance, and from that point of view has greater fairness to the wide range of students now in higher education. When we first started talking about this document that we would issue, as we used to call it, we talked about paper versions being provided by universities, and soon not became very long before we looked at the virtues during the course of the years that the committee met, at the virtues of electronic methods and the way in which an electronic version gives flexibility, whereby you could add things to the student record and the student could add things to his or her record over time, producing a document which is transparent, reliable, manageable, motivational and verifiable. So we sorted out a series of lofty aims for what we wanted to do in this particular area. But then in turn there's the question, what is the benefit of having a higher education achievement report? Firstly, it contains information which is at module level and on individual modules. It can detail styles of assessment, namely, was it a project, was it timed examination, was it oral examinations, was it other styles of assessment that have been introduced, and how can these be recorded, and might they tell you something about the student? So for example, a student who's very good at projects but not so good at timed examinations, making that information public is, I think, very helpful to the student and the employer. There's also a record in this document of what I would call extramural activities, and by that we would say memberships of clubs and societies. For example, if somebody runs the student newspaper, and I see copies of Palatinate on the table as I came in, the students who produce that, and I can say this without even glancing inside it, because every student newspaper has an editorial team, with all the demands of being a journalist. And whoever works on that needs to have it recorded, because it says something about them as individuals. Or, for example, I took to entertaining students who ran the volunteering organisation in Leicester. And one year, an English graduate came along, and she said she'd had a really interesting year. She'd run the volunteering organisation. It was 1,700 students, and this was how many hours work they did, and she'd organised it alongside her study. And I said, gosh, that's really impressive. She said, well, it's not as impressive as the head teacher of the primary school where I go to help children read every week. And I said, just a minute, how many teachers are in the school? She said, oh, there are 9 teachers in the school, and they have 200 or 300 students. And I said, just a minute, now let's go back to your numbers from the volunteering organisation. What you're doing is more impressive numerically than what the head teacher does. And from that point of view, this is something that we want to get recorded in terms of the Higher Education Achievement Report, whereby we give access to the extramural work, to the learner record, and there is potential for students to apply for jobs and to get careers advice using the Higher Education Achievement Report in its online form. So how can the HERE contribute? It seems to me that most universities have reached the point where they give it as a summative record. That's only part of the story, because we saw it as a formative document where it aids discussion, or has the potential to aid discussion, between students and personal tutors. Some personal tutors are absolutely wonderful with their tutees and can hold conversations quite spontaneously and really make a difference. To other people, they will say it's a real struggle to have, in terms of the numbers of students they have as their tutees, to actually engage with them. And from that point of view, the HERE gives a framework around which you can construct a conversation. And we've been doing quite a lot of work nationally in order to encourage people to operate in that way. Because the HERE can act as an aid memoir, and also the HERE can record aspects of community engagement, and also a record of the leadership skills that students develop. So what are the key features? First of all, a transcript which is linked to the Bologna European Diploma Supplement. It's a document that includes a verification of non-formal learning, and it is an improved summative judgment of student activity, but I hope will become a summative judgment drawing on the formative arrangements that have occurred. So formative development makes sense in terms of developing the student record to highlight student engagement, to widen employability, and thinking about how we can use the Higher Education Achievement Report. If you have a student moving from, let's say, Leicester to Durham, if they bring their Higher Education Achievement Report with them, you get a much more detailed record than you do if you just ask for the degree transcript, which will tell you whether they got a 2-1 or not on various activities, but won't actually help you to assess the skills and attributes that the student already possesses. So the benefits are in terms of standardised transcripts, greater efficiency of evaluating the student life and student learning, and also promoting the ways in which a document of a student's educational record can be used in the forward look for employability. Now, those are just to say some things about the Higher Education Achievement Report. Going back to where I started with an autobiographical account of parts of my career, suitably edited for the audience, one of the things that I would argue is that what we've been doing nationally in the Higher Education Achievement Report carries with it threads of the development of my career in Durham in teacher training and then subsequently in sociology. I think I can find in there different aspects of that. But then you might say to me, well, that's all very well, but you've been talking about your career, so where's your career reached? And I'd say, well, into retirement, it's clearly building the portfolio career, which is a new challenge that I'm taking on. Thank you very much indeed. I'm happy to answer whatever you want to talk about this evening.